The night was alive with gunfire in Coyote Ridge. The sharp cracks of rifles echoed between the shuttered buildings, and the dry wind carried the smell of smoke and dust. Clara Mae Dawson was locking up her father's old general store when the door slammed open so hard the bell above it snapped off its hook. A man stumbled inside, collapsing against the doorframe, blood soaking through his torn shirt. Boots thundered outside. Shouts carried through the night. "Find him! Don't let him get away!" Clara froze, heart hammering in her chest. The man's ragged breath drew her eyes downward, and when he lifted his face, her stomach turned to stone. Eli Turner, the man she once loved, the man she'd sent away 8 years ago, and now, the man dying on her floor. Eli Turner had always been a man caught between the horizon and his past. 8 years ago, when Clara Mae Dawson told him to leave, he'd thought it was temporary. He believed if he rode far enough, worked hard enough, made something of himself, maybe she'd look at him differently, not as the poor ranch hand with dust on his boots, but as a man worth keeping. But she never came after him, and he never came back. The drifter's years. Eli drifted, from cattle drives in Texas to rail yards in Kansas. He earned his keep the way men like him always did, with his back, his fists, and his Colt .45 when trouble came calling. He'd seen gunfights start over whiskey and end in blood on the floorboards. He'd buried friends without knowing their real names. Every new town was the same. A crooked sheriff, a hungry saloon girl, a game of poker that ended in someone pulling steel. Eli never stayed longer than a few weeks. He didn't put roots down, didn't keep letters, didn't make promises. People called him Ghost Turner on the cattle trails. He'd appear, work, and vanish again like smoke on the wind. But no matter how far he rode, Clara's memory rode with him. The woman he lost. He remembered the summer she'd broken his heart. Coyote Ridge had been choking in heat, cicadas screaming from the cottonwoods, and Clara had stood on her father's porch with tears she refused to let fall. "Eli, I can't," she'd whispered. "I can't live my whole life waiting for a man with nothing but dust in his pockets." He'd begged her, but she'd been stubborn as sun-baked earth. And then she'd turned her back on him. After that, he'd sworn off love. Sworn off staying anywhere long enough to get hurt again. But Clara's voice never left him. Neither did the ache. The murder charge. Then, for weeks ago, trouble finally caught up with him. Eli had been working freight security near Abilene when a wealthy trader named Silas Maddox came through town. Maddox was a hard man with harder friends, and Eli had no reason to cross him, until Maddox's son, Caleb, picked a fight at the saloon. No one could say who drew first, but when the gun smoke cleared, Caleb Maddox lay dead on the floor. Witnesses swore Eli pulled the trigger. Eli swore he didn't. Didn't matter. Maddox had money, and money meant power. By the next dawn, there was a $500 bounty on Eli's head, dead or alive. He rode hard, avoiding towns, avoiding people. But Maddox's reach was long. Every sheriff, every hired gun, every dusty street seemed to whisper his name. And fate, cruel as ever, drove him straight back toward Coyote Ridge, the last place he'd ever meant to see again. The trap he didn't see coming. He thought if he kept his head low, he could skirt around the town, maybe find refuge in the canyons until Maddox's rage cooled. But when he reached the edge of Coyote Ridge, he found something worse than bounty posters with his face. There were posters of Clara Mae Dawson too. Wanted. Accused of stealing $200 from Maddox's trading company. Eli's gut twisted when he saw her name. Clara? The woman who once gave pennies from her own purse to children too poor to buy bread? Maddox was framing her, using her as bait. That was when Eli made his choice. He'd been running his whole life. Not anymore. Return to Coyote Ridge. The sun dipped low when Eli rode into town, hat pulled down to shadow his face. He didn't go near the main street. Too many eyes there, too many rifles. Instead, he tied his horse behind the Dawson store, where lamplight glimmered faintly through the window. He hadn't seen her in 8 years, and yet he knew her silhouette instantly. Clara Mae. Hair pinned up like always, shoulders squared against the weight of a world too cruel for a woman that gentle. His throat tightened, but he didn't knock. Didn't get the chance. Boots thundered down the alley behind him. Men shouting. Gunmetal glinting in the dying light. He turned, fired, and felt the hot burn of a bullet tear across his ribs. And that's how he ended up collapsing against her doorframe, blood soaking his shirt, his past finally catching him. Clara Mae Dawson had grown used to silence. 8 years of it, heavy as dust in her father's old general store. The bell above the door rarely rang these days. Not since the railroad had pulled business west and Coyote Ridge started drying up like a riverbed in August. She spent her mornings stacking flour sacks, her afternoons sweeping sand from the worn oak floors, and her nights staring out the window at a street that no longer belonged to her. The townsfolk whispered, though they thought she couldn't hear. Poor Clara Mae, plain as prairie grass. No wonder no man stayed. Turned down Silas Maddox's proposal, too. Foolish girl. Could have had land, security. Bet she regrets it now. She'd learned to keep her chin up and her eyes down, to let the words roll over her like summer dust storms. But sometimes, when the nights were too quiet, they still found their way under her skin. The years without Eli. After Eli left, she thought time would smooth the edges of her regret. Didn't. She told herself she was doing the right thing, that pushing him away would free him to chase a better life. He deserved more than a shopkeeper's daughter with no dowry, no status, and nothing to offer but her heart. But years later, with her father gone and the store barely hanging on, she'd started to wonder if she'd made the worst mistake of her life. She'd never married, never even courted, not after Eli. The traitor's threat. Silas Maddox had been circling like a buzzard since her father's funeral 2 years back. He owned half the freight business passing through Coyote Ridge, and he'd made her an offer she refused more than once. Marriage to him meant security, but it also meant chains. Everyone knew how Maddox treated his wives. When she refused him the third time, he leaned close enough she could smell the tobacco on his breath. "You'll change your mind, girl," he'd hissed, his voice low and sharp. "One day you'll be begging me to save you." She'd thought it was just bluster. She was wrong. The posters. The first sign came 2 weeks ago. An old ranch hand, half drunk, stumbled into her store holding a crumpled wanted poster. Her name was on it. So was a bounty. $200 dead or alive. The charge? Theft. At first, she laughed. A sharp, bitter sound she barely recognized as her own. But when the sheriff came by that evening with 2 deputies and a hard look in his eye, the truth settled cold in her chest. Silas Maddox had done it. He'd framed her. She tried to reason with the sheriff, but Boone wasn't a man who liked her much to begin with. Boone had history with Eli Turner, and anyone tied to Eli was dirt in his eyes. "If you've got nothing to hide, Clara," Boone drawled, "then you've got nothing to fear. But if I find out you've been dipping into Maddox's coffers." He let the threat hang, and she understood. He wouldn't protect her. No one in Coyote Ridge would. The man at her door. That night, she sat by the oil lamp, staring at the stack of bills she owed, the cracked panes in the windows, and the unwanted poster she'd torn from the hitching post outside. She was out of time, out of friends, and out of choices. And that was when Eli Turner staggered through her door, bleeding and half-conscious. When she saw his face, her breath caught like a snared rabbit. 8 years had carved him into someone harder, leaner, rougher. His jaw was shadowed with stubble, his once boyish smile replaced by something weary and sharp. His eyes, the same storm gray she remembered, carried ghosts she couldn't name. He fell against the doorframe, catching himself with a bloodied hand. Clara! Her name was a rasp on his lips. The warning. Behind him, bootsteps pounded down the street. Voices shouted in the dark. "Turner's in town. Fan out. Check every building." She dropped to her knees beside him, hands trembling as she pressed them against the gash in his ribs. "Eli, what happened? Why are they after you?" His breath was shallow, his voice rough with exhaustion. "Maddox," he choked out, "framed me murder. His son. I didn't do it." Before she could respond, he gripped her wrist, his blood-slicked fingers cold against her skin. Clara, listen to me. They're coming for you, too. Her stomach dropped. Me? He put your name on a poster. Said you stole from him. For a moment, the room tilted. Maddox hadn't just ruined her. He'd painted a target on her back. Trusting a ghost. The street outside erupted with noise as riders closed in. Eli's grip tightened. You have to trust me, Clara. We've got to get out. Now. She hesitated only a moment. The same mistake she'd made 8 years ago, when she'd let him walk away. But this time she didn't let go. This time she chose him. Into the night. Eli half stumbled, half dragged her through the back door, weaving between shadows as torchlights spilled across the street. They ducked into an alley, her heart pounding so hard she thought the men outside could hear it. From the edge of town, she could see the jagged ridges of the painted canyons, their sandstone faces glowing pale beneath the moonlight. Where are we going? She whispered. Somewhere Maddox's men won't follow, he murmured. At least, not yet. She didn't know what lay ahead. Only that Coyote Ridge was no longer safe. The night swallowed them whole as they slipped into the alley behind Clara's store. Somewhere down the street, a lantern crashed, men shouted, and the thunder of boots on wooden planks grew louder. Eli's breath was ragged, his hand pressed tight against his bleeding ribs. Clara could hear the wet rasp of pain in his chest, but he didn't slow. He couldn't. This way, he whispered, tugging her hand toward the shadows. The sheriff's arrival. A shout split the air, sharp as a rifle crack. Turner! Stop where you are. Sheriff Boone. Clara's heart stumbled. Boone had always hated Eli. Back when they were boys, they'd fought over everything from horses to card games to her. Boone had grown meaner with the badge, and now Maddox's bounty had given him reason enough to hunt Eli like a coyote. Don't make me shoot you, Turner. Boone's voice rolled down the street, cold and steady. Step out now, hands up, and maybe I'll let the girl walk free. Eli stiffened beside her. Clara felt the tension in him, the way his muscles coiled beneath his torn shirt. He's lying? Eli murmured, voice rough with certainty. Boone's working for Maddox. If we surrender, we're both dead. Clara swallowed hard, fingers tightening on his arm. Into the painted canyons. They darted between the backyards of shuttered homes, slipping past laundry lines and stacked crates. The moonlight painted long shadows on the ground, and every crunch of gravel underfoot made Clara flinch. Somewhere behind them, a rifle fired. The bullet splintered a fence post inches from her shoulder. Eli spun, drawing his Colt in one smooth motion, firing back once, twice. Sparks flared in the darkness. Keep moving, he barked. By the time they reached the edge of town, her lungs burned, and Eli was barely standing. His shirt clung to him, soaked through with blood, but his grip on her hand was unyielding. Beyond the last row of buildings, the land opened into the painted canyons, an expanse of sandstone ridges and jagged rock carved by centuries of wind. Moonlight washed the stone in pale silver and shadow, and for a moment, it almost looked like another world. We can hide there, Eli said, voice rough. No one knows those canyons better than me. She glanced at him, startled. How? Spent half my youth out here, he muttered. When your father thought I wasn't good enough for you, I'd come here instead. Safer than fighting him. Clara's chest tightened, but there was no time to respond. Pursuit. They climbed into the maze of rock, scrambling up loose gravel, ducking behind outcroppings as Maddox's men and Boone's deputies closed in. Torches bobbed below like fireflies, their voices echoing through the stone. Turner, we know you're in there. Come out, boy. Ain't nowhere to run. Clara crouched beside Eli, both of them pressed against a sandstone wall worn smooth by time. We can't outrun them, she whispered. Eli's jaw flexed as he reloaded his Colt with shaking hands. We're not outrunning them, he said quietly. We're outlasting them. The shelter. By dawn, they'd found an old miner's cave, half hidden behind a curtain of brush. Inside, it smelled of earth and damp stone, but it was shelter, a place where they could catch their breath. Eli sank against the wall, his breath shallow, his face pale beneath the stubble. Clara tore strips from her petticoat and pressed them against his wound, ignoring the way his blood soaked through the fabric. "Hold still," she whispered, her hands trembling. "You always were bossy," he rasped, attempting a smile. "And you always were reckless," she shot back, though her voice cracked halfway through. Their eyes met in the dim light, and something passed between them. A memory, a regret, 1,000 unsaid words. The confession. Clara broke first. 8 years, she whispered, her voice barely louder than the wind outside. 8 years, Eli. I thought you hated me for sending you away. He looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable in his gray eyes. I didn't hate you, he said finally. I hated myself for not being enough. She shook her head fiercely. It was never about that, wasn't it? His voice was low, rough with more than pain. Your father said I'd never make you a home, said I'd never be worth more than the dust on my boots. And maybe he was right. Clara's throat tightened. I never cared about the dust, Eli. For a moment, silence filled the cave, broken only by his ragged breathing. Then Eli leaned forward, resting his forehead against hers, his voice no louder than a prayer. I can't lose you again, Clara. Not this time. Her hands stilled over his wound. The world outside was still hunting them. But in that tiny cave, all she felt was his nearness and the truth they'd both been running from. The plan. By nightfall, Eli was steadier on his feet, though every step cost him. They stood at the cave's mouth, watching torchlight flicker through the canyon below. Maddox won't stop, Eli said, his voice low and certain. Not until we're both swinging from a rope. Clara swallowed hard. So what do we do? Eli's gaze hardened, the steel she remembered flashing in his gray eyes. We go back. She blinked. Back. To Coyote Ridge. We stop running, Clara. We find proof Maddox framed us, and we put this to bed before Boone buries us for him. Clara hesitated, fear clawing up her throat. But when Eli reached for her hand, she didn't pull away. Trust me, he murmured. She nodded once, quietly. The night stretched endless before them, the painted canyons whispering with echoes of wind and danger. But for the first time since Eli had stumbled bleeding through her door, Clara felt something she hadn't in years. Hope. The next 3 days bled together in heat, dust, and danger. Eli and Clara rode through the winding trails of the painted canyons, keeping off the main roads where Maddox's men and Boone's deputies patrolled. By day, they hid in dry creek beds and abandoned homesteads, sleeping in shifts. By night, they followed the stars, skirting towns where their wanted posters hung nailed to every post and wall. Everywhere they went, people looked away. In Mesa Hollow, a rancher shut the door in Clara's face before she could ask for water. In Dry Creek, the saloon keeper pretended not to know her, even though she'd once lent him flour when his supplies ran thin. No one wanted to risk helping fugitives with a bounty so high. It wasn't just Eli's name anymore. It was hers, too. The weight of whispers. Clara saw the way people looked at her now, like she was something dirty, dangerous, untouchable. 8 years of whispers about being too plain to marry, about being left behind, had been hard enough. But this? Now she was a thief, a liar, a woman on the run with an outlaw. Every time she passed a nailed-up poster with her own name beneath the bold black word wanted, it twisted something deep in her chest. One night, as they camped beneath a stunted mesquite tree, she sat staring at the fire, her arms wrapped tight around her knees. Eli sat across from her, cleaning his colt in silence. The night wind carried the distant howl of a coyote. Finally, she whispered the words she'd carried like a stone for years. I'm not beautiful enough for anyone to fight for me. The words were quiet, but they cut through the stillness like a blade. Eli's hands stilled. Slowly, he set the colt down and looked across the flames at her. Clara May, he said, his voice low and steady. You're the only thing I've ever fought for. Her breath caught, but she shook her head, staring down at the firelight. Don't say that just to make me feel better. I ain't saying it for you, he interrupted, his tone rough. I'm saying it because it's true. Hunted. Before she could answer, the distant thunder of hooves rolled across the desert floor. Eli was on his feet instantly, scanning the horizon. Clara scrambled up beside him, heart hammering. From the ridge above, torchlight flared Boone's men. They've found us, Eli muttered. He grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the horses. They mounted fast and tore across the flats, the wind ripping through Clara's hair, the pounding of hooves rattling her bones. Shots cracked behind them, bullets kicking up dust at their heels. Eli leaned low over his saddle, his face grim and pale beneath the moonlight. "Hang on!" he shouted. They raced into a narrow canyon, the walls rising steep and jagged on either side. Echoes of the pursuit bounced off the stone. Shouts, gunfire, the frantic cries of men and horses. At the canyon's heart, Eli yanked hard on the reins and led them into a hidden ravine, barely wide enough for their mounts. They dismounted quickly, pressing their backs against the cool rock as Boone's riders thundered past above them. Clara held her breath, Eli's body shielding hers as shadows flickered over the sandstone. One wrong move, one loose stone, and they'd be dead. Boone's offer. Later that night, they reached an old trapper's cabin deep in the foothills. It smelled of pine sap and age, but it was shelter. Eli barred the door, and they finally let themselves breathe. But peace didn't last. Near dawn, hoofbeats pounded outside. A voice called through the walls. Boone's voice, smooth and mocking. "Turner, I know you're in there." Eli's grip on his Colt tightened, but he didn't move. "Come out quiet, boy," Boone drawled, "and I'll make sure Maddox don't put a rope round the girl's neck. I give you my word." Clara's eyes widened, but Eli didn't even glance at her. "Your word ain't worth spit," he called back, voice sharp as flint. Boone chuckled, low and dark. "Suit yourself. Ain't no one rides forever. I'll have you, Turner, dead or alive." The sound of retreating hooves followed, but the promise in Boone's words hung heavy in the air. Fractures. After Boone's departure, silence filled the cabin. Clara paced near the cold hearth, fingers twisting in her skirts. "Eli," she said softly, maybe we should turn ourselves in. If we explain." He turned on her so fast she flinched. "There ain't no explaining, Clara," he snapped. "Maddox owns the sheriff, the deputies, half the damned judges in this territory. You think they'll listen? You think they care?" She stared at him, her throat tight. I don't want you to die for me." For a moment his expression softened. He stepped closer, his voice dropping low, rough with something more than anger. "I've been dying without you for 8 years. Her breath caught. Neither of them moved. The storm ahead. They knew then that running would never be enough. Maddox wouldn't stop. Boone wouldn't stop. To end this, they'd have to go back to Coyote Ridge. To face Maddox. To expose his lies. To risk everything. Eli holstered his Colt and met Clara's gaze across the dim cabin. "One last ride," he said softly. "We clear our names, or we die trying." Clara nodded, fear trembling in her chest. But alongside it, something fiercer burned. For the first time, she wasn't just running because Eli told her to. She was choosing this. Choosing him. Coyote Ridge hadn't changed much in 8 years. The main street still baked under the same merciless sun. The hitching posts leaned the same way they always had, weathered by heat and time. But for Clara Mae Dawson, the town felt like a stranger now. Her wanted posters flapped against the boards of the general store her father once owned. Eli's face stared back from every street corner, his name scrawled beneath the bold black words. Murderer. $500 dead or alive. And yet they came back. Because running hadn't saved them. Only truth would. The plan. Eli stood at the edge of town, his gray eyes fixed on the courthouse at the far end of the street. That was where Maddox held court these days, twisting the law to his liking, paying off anyone who dared oppose him. "We get proof Maddox framed us," Eli said, checking the rounds in his Colt. "And we show it to everyone who'll listen. If the people turn on him, Boone's badge won't be enough to save him. Clara swallowed hard. Clutching the folded papers Eli had risked his life stealing from one of Maddox's freight offices. Forged ledgers, doctored contracts, evidence of every bribe and lie. Her hands trembled, but her voice didn't. And if they don't listen? Eli holstered his Colt, glanced at her, and said flatly, "Then we fight." The walk back. The two of them rode in slow, their horses kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. Every eye in town turned to follow them. Doors creaked shut. Murmurs rippled like wind through dry grass. Clara held her head high, though inside her chest, her heart thundered. Eli rode beside her, broad-shouldered and silent, the brim of his hat shadowing his expression. Sheriff Boone stepped into the middle of the street as they dismounted, rifle resting casually on his shoulder. "Well, look what the coyotes dragged in," he drawled. "Turner, Dawson, thought you two were smarter than this." Eli's hand hovered near his holster, but he didn't draw. "We're here to clear our names," he said evenly. "That's all." Boone's lips curled into a humorless smile. "Ain't no clearing to be done. Maddox owns this town. Best thing you can do is lay down your gun and pray." Eli shook his head slowly. "Not this time." The showdown. Maddox himself strode out of the courthouse, flanked by hired guns with polished rifles and cold eyes. His slick gray suit and gold watch chain gleamed beneath the midday sun, but his smile was darker than oil. "Eli Turner," Maddox boomed, his voice carrying down the street, "I should have had you strung up weeks ago. And Miss Dawson." His gaze slid to Clara, lingering in a way that made Eli's jaw tighten. "Shame you got mixed up with the wrong man again. Could have had a comfortable life with me." Clara stepped forward before Eli could speak, her chin lifted. "I'd rather hang beside Eli than live a single day as your wife." Gasps rippled through the crowd gathering near the edges of the street. Maddox's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. Eli seized the moment, holding up the stolen ledgers for everyone to see. "I've got proof," he shouted. "Proof Maddox framed me, framed Clara, bought Boone, and bought this whole damn town." Maddox's face darkened like storm clouds rolling over dry land. "Lies!" he barked. "Boone, arrest him." The sheriff hesitated, his rifle lowering just slightly as murmurs rippled louder through the crowd. People craned their necks, watching, listening. "I said arrest him," Maddox roared. Boone's grip tightened on his rifle, but his eyes slid across the faces of the townsfolk. People Maddox had cheated, taxed, ruined. Finally, Boone spat in the dust. "Not today." The last bullet. Maddox's rage boiled over. He yanked a pistol from his holster and fired. Eli dove, pulling Clara down behind a trough as splinters of wood exploded around them. He rolled, came up on one knee, and returned fire. One sharp crack that sent Maddox's hat spinning into the dust. Maddox snarled and fired again. The second shot grazed Eli's arm, spinning him back against the trough. Before Maddox could aim a third time, Boone's rifle roared. The wealthy trader staggered, his gold watch chain snapping, and crumpled into the dirt. Justice. For a moment, silence swallowed the street. Then someone in the crowd shouted, "I knew it! Maddox has been bleeding us dry for years." Another voice rose, and another, until the courthouse steps erupted in shouts and anger. Maddox's hired guns, suddenly outnumbered, lowered their rifles and backed away. Boone walked forward, planting himself in the center of the street. "Maddox is done," he declared. "These two ain't guilty of nothing but trusting the wrong man." Slowly, Clara's breath came easier. The weight of 8 years, of whispers, regret, and shame, began to lift. The aftermath. Later, when the dust had settled and the crowd had dispersed, Eli stood with Clara on the steps of the courthouse, the blood drying on his sleeve. "It's over," she whispered, almost not believing it. Eli looked down at her, his storm-gray eyes softening. "Not over," he murmured. "Just beginning." For the first time in 8 years, Clara let herself believe him. The weeks after the showdown passed like slow-moving clouds over Coyote Ridge. The town seemed different somehow, as if the dust that had settled over it for decades had finally been shaken away. Children played along the creek, their laughter echoing between the sun-baked buildings. Horses whinnied in the distance, and the wind carried the faint scent of wild sage. Clara Mae Dawson walked the streets with her head held high, no longer weighed down by whispers or posters. Her shop reopened, its windows gleaming clean beneath the morning sun. Shelves stocked with flour, sugar, and tools. She moved through her days with a new energy, the kind that comes when fear finally loosens its grip. Every customer who entered the store now looked her in the eye, and many tipped their hats politely, some even nodding in respect. The meadow. One evening, Eli led her to a meadow just outside town. The sky stretched wide and open, painted in shades of amber, rose, and gold as the sun set behind distant hills. Wildflowers had claimed the earth, swaying gently in the breeze. The grass brushed their legs, soft as new beginnings. Clara inhaled, letting the scent of sage and flowers fill her lungs. For the first time in years, she felt no fear, no danger looming in the shadows. Eli stood beside her, his hand brushing hers casually at first. She didn't pull away. "You always loved the open sky," he said softly, watching her. "I remember you saying the horizon made you feel free." She turned to him, eyes glimmering. "I never felt free until now," she admitted. The moment between them, they walked together through the meadow, words unnecessary. Every glance, every touch, spoke of trust rebuilt over danger, over fear, over years apart. Eli stopped in the middle of the flowers and reached for her hand. She let him, her fingers intertwining with his. His grip was gentle, almost afraid she might vanish again. But she was there. She had come back. "Clara," he murmured, his voice low, carrying both strength and tenderness. "I've waited for this. For you. For us. All this time. Through every mile, every gunshot, every moment I thought I'd lost you forever. I've waited for this." She looked up at him, seeing the storm-gray eyes softened by sincerity and love. The man who had fought and bled and survived, all for her. "And I'm here," she whispered. "I'm not leaving again." A future together. The sun dipped lower, painting the wildflowers in molten gold. Eli drew Clara close, wrapping his arm around her shoulders as they looked out at the endless horizon. "You're the beauty I've waited for," he said, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. Clara felt tears prick her eyes, tears of relief, of joy, of everything she had buried for 8 years. She leaned into him, letting herself finally rest, finally trust. For the first time, silence was comforting, not lonely. The world felt right. The past, with its danger and heartbreak, had been survived. The present was theirs. And the future was wide open. Quiet happiness. Weeks became months. Coyote Ridge slowly healed along with its people. Eli helped Clara in the shop, but more often, they rode together across the meadows and ridges, free of bounty posters, free of threats, free of the shadows that had chased them for so long. At night, they would sit beneath the stars, hands entwined, sharing stories, laughter, and quiet dreams. Sometimes they said nothing, letting the sounds of the wind and the soft night envelop them. And when Clara finally allowed herself to look at him fully, she saw not just the cowboy who had come back bleeding to her door, but the man who had chosen her every single day since, even when survival had seemed impossible. Eli brushed a thumb across her cheek, soft as a promise. "I'll never let you go again," he said. Clara smiled, her heart lighter than it had been in years. "I know," she whispered, closing her eyes. The meadow was quiet now, save for the gentle rustle of wildflowers. The horizon stretched endlessly before them, full of promise. And in that perfect silence, they finally allowed themselves to breathe, together. For the first time since the night he staggered into her store, Clara felt safe, loved, and truly home. The world could wait. They had each other, and that was enough.